The founders of modern international law. The essence of the new approach of the international law can be traced back to the Spanish philosopher of that country, Golden Age. The leading figure of this school was Francisco Victoria, professor of theology at the University of Salamanca, 1480 to 1546. His lectures were preserved by his students and published posthumously. He demonstrated a remarkably progressive attitude for his time towards the Spanish conquest of the South American Indians, and, contrary to the views prevalent until then, maintained that the Indian peoples should be regarded as nations with their own legitimate interests. War against them could only be justified on the grounds of a just cause. International law was founded on the universal law of nature, and this meant the non-Europeans must be included within its ambit. However, Victoria by no means advocated the recognition of the Indian nations as equal to the Christian states of Europe. For him, opposing work of the missionaries in the territories was a just reason for war, and he adopted a rather extensive view as to the rights of the Spaniards in South America. Victoria was a liberal and indeed acted on behalf of the Spanish Inquisition, but his lectures did mark a step forward in the right direction. Suarez, 1548 to 1617, was a Jesuit and professor of theology who was deeply immersed in medieval culture. He noted that the obligatory character of international law was based upon natural law, while its substance derived from the natural law rule of carrying out agreements entered into. From a totally different background, but equally, if not more, influential was Alberico Gentili, 1552 to 1608. He was born in the northern Italy and fled to England to avoid persecution, having converted to Protestantism. In 1598, his De Juveli was published. It is a comprehensive discussion of the law of war and contains a valuable section on the law of treaties. Gentili, who became a professor at Oxford, had been called originator of the secular school of thought in international law, and he minimized the hereto significant theological thesis. It is, however, Hugo Grotius, a Dutch scholar, who towers over this period and has been celebrated, if a little exaggeratedly, as the father of international law. He was born in 1583 and was the supreme Renaissance man. A scholar of tremendous learning, he mastered history, theology, mathematics, and the law. His primary work was the De Juveli Arc Paris, written during 1623 and 1624. It is an extensive work and includes rather more devotion to the exposition of private law notions than would seem appropriate today. He refers both to Victoria and Gentili, the latter being of special influence with regard to many matters, particularly organization of materials. Grotius finally exercised theology from international law and emphasized the irrelevance in such a study of any conception of a divine law. He remarked that the law of nature would be valid even if there were no God, a statement which, although suitably clothed in religious protestation, was extremely daring. The law of nature now reverted to being founded exclusively on reason. Justice was part of man's social makeup and thus not only useful but essential. Grotius conceived of a comprehensive system of international law, and his work rapidly became a university textbook. However, in many spheres, he followed well-trodden paths. He retained the theological distinction between a just and an unjust war, a notion that was soon to disappear from treatises on international law, but which in some way underpins modern approaches to aggression, self-defense, and liberation. One of his most enduring opinions consists in his proclamation of the freedom of the seas. The Dutch scholar opposed the closed seas concept of the Portuguese that was later elucidated by the English writer John Selden, and emphasized instead the principle that the nations could not appropriate to themselves the high seas. They belonged to all. It must, of course, be mentioned parenthetically that this theory happened to accord rather nicely with prevailing Dutch ideas as to free trade and the needs of an expanding commercial empire. However, this merely points up what must not be disregarded, namely that concepts of law as of politics and other disciplines are firmly rooted in the world of reality and reflects contemporary preoccupations. No theory develops in a vacuum, but is conceived and brought to fruition in a definite cultural and social environment. To ignore this is to distort the theory itself.